Thank you for joining us in celebrating the author of Liberation Square inside the Egyptian Revolution and the Rebirth of a Nation. As we've heard, Ashraf Khalil has covered the Middle East for 15 years. His assignments has taken him to some of the most intense conflicts in the region in the past decade. But he's also been very privileged to spend extensive time in most of the countries he's covered. And in that sense, he brought us in-depth stories and day-to-day accounts of people's lives. From Cairo to Baghdad to Jerusalem and Gaza, Ashraf Khalil's gripping reports appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the Times of London, The Economist, Foreign Policy, San Francisco Chronicle, the Christian Science Monitor, and the Middle East edition of Rolling Stone. Thank you for being with us, Ashraf, today.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is a great turnout.
Simply put, the reviews of Liberation Square tell it all. Even as Ashraf was still writing the book, it was very clear for many of us around him that this was going to emerge as the definitive guide to the Egyptian Revolution. Let me just share some of the words used in describing the book. Thrilling, insightful, compelling, nuanced, engaging, and illuminating. On a personal note, for me, reading the book essentially summed up my entire professional career for the past 10 years. Everything major that happened in Egypt under Mubarak's reign was mentioned in that book. Every protest, every trial, every little fiasco with every little nuance was mentioned in that book. So in that sense, Ashraf was very lucky. He clearly was early on positioned to bring us this very interesting and thrilling book. So this was not only an author who read about Mubarak's era in newspaper clippings or in the archives of news agencies. It was someone who clearly had experienced all of these events firsthand. So Ashraf, as I mentioned from the beginning, you were positioned to bring us the early birth of the revolution, as has been mentioned in the reviews. You essentially were able to situate the uprising through the years and go through the seeds of the revolution dating all the way back to the 1990s. Tell us more about that, and why was it so important for you to choose that kind of narrative, to go through all these events instead of, for example, writing a book going through the blow-by-blow events of the 18-day revolution?
Well, I think Hello? Oh, there we go. I think, as you said, but because I had the privilege of being here from such an early point and covering so many twists and turns in this, and I think just sort of when I was trying to conceive the book, that part expanded, where I realized I needed to kind of set the stage for where the country found itself, and I think one of the things was, I work for multiple places, so I had multiple sets of editors trying to get me to compare Hosni Mubarak to their narrative of an authoritarian dictator, and I had to keep telling different sets of editors, he wasn't Saddam Hussein, he wasn't Hafez al-Assad, this wasn't somebody who plotted and seized power. He almost backed into it. And once I had that perception of him, as the first chapter is called The Accidental Dictator, and about kind of how he became president almost by default, and how this guy managed to hold on for 30 years. It was one of the, once you say that it's like, okay, this wasn't some, that he didn't plot, he didn't scheme, he didn't seize power, then how did he end up running the place for 30 years? And so I felt the need to go back. And I moved to Egypt in '97, just before Luxor, like a month before the Luxor massacre, and was witness to, for example, going back through my stories, it was really beneficial, all 10, 15 years of stories I'd written. Like going back to the coverage of the last istiftad, the last yes-no one candidate presidential election, which was, I think, '99, and the newspapers filling up with pages and pages of testimonials to Mubarak and the worship, and even though it didn't even seem necessary, it was weird to watch that. And it was great to go through my interviews and go back to the period before me, to go back to those first 10 years when Mubarak he was Lavashkiri, Neji. He was regarded, he was laughing cow, but he wasn't hated. And how he went from this perceived lightweight, he was someone who was perceived by the country as not that bright, and how he consolidated things. So that was fascinating to me.
And moving from that part to the actual explosion of the revolution, January 28th, in your description of the Asr battle, Asr Bridge battle, you use a simple line to essentially tell it all. You say, and I quote, "Everything changed in that moment." For you to witness that battle, what were your thoughts, your feelings witnessing that battle? Could you tell what was going to happen? Could you tell the end?
Asr scared the hell out of me. Asr was really intense and scary, and I was there for one of the last security pushes around 4 o'clock when people were battling about halfway across the bridge, and it was really intense. And I've got like just very shaky video of me kind of like running for my life with my camera held up behind my head, and I was there when they sort of pushed everybody back. And what I missed was the fall of Asr Nil. I witnessed a different moment, the fall of Kubri Galet, which was amazing in that there was this back and forth tear gas battle all around the area where the Sheraton is, and then suddenly everybody kind of looked up and the police were gone, and it took 5 minutes for us to realize really what had happened. Suddenly there's people sort of climbing onto the cars, and there's still Emnin Markezi guys around, there's still officers around, but they're kind of wandering around confused, and the protesters are flowing past them. It takes you a while to even internalize the fact that suddenly we've got them, you know, to use the we. I mean, the tide has shifted and they are at the mercy of the protesters. And I'll never forget being on Kubri Galet around, say, 3 o'clock when the security forces pulled back, and there was still some stragglers, and there's protesters streaming towards the Opera House and streaming towards Asr Nil Bridge, and there's still like a collection of officers together talking, and I sort of walk past them and eavesdrop, and they're like looking at their phones going, or their radios going, "Mahadish Birut." Nobody's answering. They were confused. And there was a bunch of kids spray painting one of the bookset, one of the central security paddy wagons. And there was one middle-aged officer who just hadn't gotten the memo, who was just kind of like still trying to be, still thought he was running the show. And he turns to these kids. He's like, "Hey, yalla," and he just, just starts yelling at them. And a protester walks up to him, sticks a finger in his face, and just goes, "Shh, shh." And the guy kind of looks around, does the math, and slinks away. It was amazing to see that, and I didn't get to see the fall of Asr Nil. That was one of my big challenges in this, was recreating that moment, because that was a very powerful moment, and finding as many people as possible and trying to tell it as a patchwork, different people's experiences on that bridge. And I'll tell you, the moment that the turning point for me that I did get to witness was I made it to Asr Nil. They pushed us all back, a lot of buckshot. I mean, bloodier injuries than I had ever seen. And the people, the protesters are like dragging blankets loaded with rocks up to the front lines. And I remember they pushed us all back and they drove us deep into Zamalek. And a bunch of stragglers made it back to Meden Galet, where people were still holding it. And this is about 4 o'clock, 4:30. And people are a little demoralized. They've been beaten back. They're tired. We've sucked up a lot of tear gas. All of a sudden, 3,000 people start coming up Shara Murad. And about another 2,000-3,000 start coming up Shara Tahrir again. Like, these were people that had fought their way from Medani Giza and had spent the whole day fighting. And the roar that went up over the crowd, and watching them march straight towards Asr Nil, and that was the confidence boost. Did you have the clarity of mind at the moment to kind of understand what was going on, to see that there was no going back? At that moment, when I saw those reinforcements come in at just the right time and head straight for Asr Nil Bridge, and at that point I had to go file, I mean, I was writing for like 3 people that day, so file multiple batches of stories and find a place with internet to get any of this done. And but at that moment, that was an incredibly powerful moment. You